Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. Today, we're going to flip the script on you a little bit. We have a great guest, someone into land banking and using land as an investment vehicle to generate or purchase passive investment properties. Kind of a cool strategy. And I think as we get into more, an environment where our population continues to grow, I think we're going to continue to see more demand for land, right? Because there's a lot of value in land, especially if you know how to monetize it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about land, monetizing land, and using the capital, right, from your ability to being able to monetize land to be able to invest in other income producing assets, such as apartment buildings or cash flowing rental properties. So today I'd like to welcome to the show, Dan Haberkost. Welcome, man.
John, thank you very much for having me. That was a great introduction. I'm excited to talk a little bit about land, building, and rentals, whatever will help the audience.
Beautiful, bud. So let me introduce you really quick to our audience. So at the age of 25, Dan has managed to build an impressive real estate business and portfolio that allows him the freedom to live and work where he wants while spending a great deal of time pursuing his passions. I love it, man. Simple, sweet, right? Yeah. And hitting the high point of financial freedom. Love that. So, hey, man, welcome to the show. So, but tell us, let's get started, right? Talk to us a little bit about land. Why land banking? Why land as your primary vehicle for generating cash?
Yeah. So this is going to sound a lot smarter in hindsight, as everything always does. But looking back, ultimately, it's so much less competitive, right? If you want to go out and try and find existing residential houses off market at a discount, you can do it. I have friends doing it, but your cost per contract is going to be quite a bit. I have a buddy who's had a wholesaling business for 6 or 7 years, and he still spends $6,000 per contract here in Colorado Springs. So that is a viable strategy, but it's very expensive. And to backtrack a little bit even further, I bought my first rental when I was 21 when I was in college. And I moved to Colorado, bought another one, and I quickly realized all the low and no money down stuff you hear is great. But if you want to build any sort of substantial portfolio, you got to figure out how to make money or partner with someone who's making a lot of money, because this is a cash intensive venture, right? When your sewer line bursts or you need a new roof or whatever happens, you got to have cash. So I ended up meeting an investor here at one of the local real estate clubs. I actually host it now, but at the time I didn't. And he had been in land and development his whole life. So ultimately that was the thing that got me into it. I went down, drove about an hour south of Colorado Springs to where he lived and learned from him weekend after weekend for over a year before I started doing much of anything myself. But that really is what got me into it. But more than anything, the impetus for some sort of active business was realizing, hey, if I want to buy a bunch of real estate, I need to make a lot more money than a normal job provides. So that's kind of how I arrived at land.
Okay, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of land do you buy, right? Talk a little bit about, because land is land, but there are a lot of different things you can do with land based on the zoning, like some of the requirements in each city. So talk a little bit about how you approach land, and then we'll get into why. Maybe start by talking about land and the different types of investments that you can create from land, the different types of income producing opportunities or investments rather, and then what your preference is and why.
Okay. Yeah. I was trying to bookmark. There's several points I want to make off that, but let's start with the type of land. So you make a great point. The land that I'm dealing with is very different than if you go way out eastern Colorado where there's nothing going on and it's just raw. So I look for failed subdivisions from many years ago where somebody already put in the often multiple millions of dollars to do all the subdividing, take that piece of raw land, go through the city, work with an engineer, a civil engineer to get the zoning and subdividing done and approved, bring in the roads, bring in the utilities. All of that is already done. So I think the largest lot, having done 70 or 80 plus deals at this point, was 1.2 acres, most of them being right around 0.3 acres, because everything I deal with is infill and it's shovel ready. And simply what I mean by shovel ready is all the utilities are in place, water, sewer line, power, zoning is done. So all you have to do is get your plan approved, make sure that plan fits on the lot, and you're good to build. And although I only build on some of them, that's also true for my end buyer. Whereas the raw land, for example, I have a friend doing this and it can be very profitable. But if you want to go way out east and take a big piece of land and subdivide it and do all that work yourself, it's very time and capital intensive. And again, you can make a lot of money, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm focusing on infill lots. And then as far as strategy as well, the lower you buy, the more options you have, right? So land, especially because it's such a neglected asset relative to houses or apartments, it's much easier to buy at 20 or 30 cents on the dollar. So I have to go back and update them, but I'm somewhere around $200 to $250 a marketing spend to get a lot under contract, somewhere between 30 and 50 cents on the dollar in my Colorado markets.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Let me highlight a couple of reasons for that, okay? Because typically your marketing spend is going to go down in proportion to either the availability of that product, right? Or in proportion to the amount of risk that you're taking, right? So more risk, less cost because you have less people pursuing the opportunity. And I'm just trying to give our audience some context.
Sure.
Right. And then, right, in your case, so you touched on a couple of things which make sense. So a couple of things that you mentioned was one, that you're pursuing failed projects. And we'll get into that discussion. So you're not going to have a lot of people pursuing those type of, even though they're small infill projects, it's a little bit more specialized, right? So you have less competition.
Go ahead and finish. Let me bookmark that. I want to make a point to that, but go ahead. Yeah.
And then we're going to come back to that because I know where you're going, but I gotta create some context for our audience, right? Good. And then the other side of that too, to your point, is infill. So it sounds like you're in more urban markets where there's a little bit more demand for land, and you just have more options to build depending on the area, I'm sure, right? Okay, cool. Yep. So now let's get into that conversation of, projects that, that have failed. So why pursue a project that has failed if it's already failed?
Yeah, great question. So let me just use one of my favorite markets that I've been in since 2018 here in Colorado. It's quickly getting built out, Pueblo West. Okay, so this was done in the 70s by the same guy who did Lake Havasu in Arizona, for whoever's familiar with that. He did Havasu first. The Army Corps of Engineers were damming up the river. He was buying the land around it, creating a subdivision. Anyways, so that's how it got done. He put millions of dollars into it. He was wealthy from previous business and did all that work. And yes, at the time, not enough people here. Now, fast forward to 2018, 19, 20, these last few years. Colorado has been one of those states where people are flocking, and especially people with a lot more money from California or just coming from Denver, which has gotten very expensive down the Front Range, down I-25. Well, that market that had failed many years ago was suddenly starting to grow very, very quickly. And so I'm glad you brought this up, John, because if it's, I have some friends doing business in Arizona, just flipping lots, and some of their markets, there's really nothing going on still. But I have been able to, and again, I sound a lot smarter in hindsight. I generally find people who help me with these things, find people much older, more experienced. But I have been in markets like these as they start to get built out. And that is why it has worked so well, because there's tons of demand and it's seemingly no one really fulfilling it. I feel like especially with Pueblo West, I've been in my own world these last few years.
So talk a little bit about the failing subdivisions, right? How are you finding the failing subdivisions, and what does that really mean? Because that can mean a couple of
things. That's a great point. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So failed as in all the work and money was put into subdividing the huge tract of land, and then a very small portion of it got built out, maybe 10, 20, 30%, and it's just sat pretty dormant for many, many years. Not a lot of people moving there. Prices haven't really changed a whole lot. That has fit all the markets I've found success in. And then recently, with some of the macro trends, got all these baby boomers retiring, getting away from cities. getting away from expensive markets, getting away from young people. And they've been a big part of who's flocking to these markets. And then, here in Colorado, Colorado Springs has gotten very expensive. And so people have just gotten pushed down the Front Range, down I-25, the main highway, to these other markets. And so there's a lot of first-time millennial home buyers too. Got
it. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about your strategy, right? How do you pursue these opportunities?
Yep.
What's the strategy?
Yeah, so the foundation of the marketing is all mail. Because you need to know your avatar, and your avatar is the person you're marketing to, whether you're selling something or trying to buy from them. And with land, it's not young people that own these lots from this subdivision from many years ago. It's a lot of older folks. So texting, for example, probably wouldn't make as much sense, but mail and then also cold calling has worked very, very well. So mail's the foundation. It's a simple letter that states an offer price, and that works really easily because I'm dealing with 20,000 lots that are almost exactly the same. So it's very easy to have a across the board offer price.
Right.
Then they call if they're motivated. Our acquisitions manager takes in the lead, and then we look at it and, is it in a prime area, flat? Is it good to build on? Or should we just flip it? Should we sell it on a note, right? We decide on the dispo strategy depending on the lot itself. And so it's really just a big funnel of land leads coming in undervalued and then deciding the best way to exit, whether it's just a quick flip or assignment or to build on it.
Okay, cool. So maybe share with us, Dan, some of the reasons why these sellers are choosing to sell.
Yeah, this is so interesting, John, because I wouldn't have expected this. I have done, like I said, I think I'm around 80 something of these deals, and they're never desperate, and they're always upper middle class to wealthy. I every single time, because I didn't hire right away. I did the first 30-ish or so transactions myself, and it would surprise me every time. We bought one at the end of last year. The owner was the neighbor. He'd lived in the market for a decade. He knew what it was worth. He was busy with his business. He'd bought it at $2,000 or something like that 30 years ago and just didn't want to deal with it. So if a notary shows up to his house and that's all he has to do, he sold it at 50 cents on the dollar. So yeah, our demographic has been upper middle class to wealthy baby boomers that just don't want to deal with it anymore. When they bought it 20 years ago, they expected to move there and build whatever life or family got in the way. They didn't do that. And now it's just a sunk cost and they're wasting tax money on it. So if you make it easy for them, a lot of times they sell.
Okay. And here's something really interesting too, right? So when you talk about, when you talk about land, you talk about the seller, you talk about some of the reasons why they want to sell. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes one of those reasons, a big motivator is, land, you got to monetize land for you to be able to cover your costs on land, right? I mean, there's a carrying cost of land, even though you're typically not paying insurance on it because it's not improved, mm-hmm. right? But there's still a carrying cost. And one of those costs are, the majority thereof taxes.
Yes.
Of course, if you have some liability associated with that land, right? If you're using it for any type of commercial use, now you have to slap general liability insurance on there. But they're still carrying cost of land. Mm-hmm. And the taxes can get very expensive depending on where that land is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, right? Even though you're calling this demographic that's fairly affluent. Mm-hmm. So probably because of the fact that they're affluent, they have a little bit more flexibility in terms of what their bottom line number is, right? Their motivations are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But there's still a little bit of pain there that's mm-hmm. helping them make that decision, right? To move it along and to take that capital and redeploy it into something else. So can you kind of maybe share that?
Yeah, just a little bit more as far as what the motivation or what they might be thinking or what.
So are there other costs when you're talking to your sellers?
Oh, yeah.
They're saying, hey, Dan, I really want to sell this place at this point, right? My wife and I, we want to go down to Mexico for, 2 years, 3 years. And mm-hmm. this plot of land that we've had for the last 15 years is going to help us do that.
Gosh, yeah. In the markets I've been in, the only cost is taxes. Yeah, I check the taxes. There's no HOAs or anything like that. So yes, the taxes are there. And again, it's part of it is because it's blown up in the last couple of years. They bought these lots for $2,000 to $5,000. Right. And I'm paying them 15. So there's that too. That helps. But yeah, I've been really surprised because we really haven't dealt with any desperate sellers. Again, I'm not talking to them now, but other than when we went after tax lists, obviously get the tax list from the county. Other than that, yeah, it's usually not been that they have to, but they just sunk costs and they're
ready to roll. So what is the average price on the lots that you're buying?
Yeah, so 14 to 16 in the markets I know well in Colorado, selling at 30 to 35. If you build on it, it gets a little bit better. So I have a build, and this has been all over the place with what's happened with commodities lately. So bear with me there, but have a build going right now. The entire basis, not including what's on the settlement statement, so realtor fees and all that, will be right around 270. Sales price of 395, and then add in the realtor's fees, and that closing costs should make 80 to 90 on that one. So builds can be really good if you do it right as well.
Okay, so just to help our audience, so you buy a piece of land, right, and there's a cost for the land. You improve on it, meaning you build on it, build your house on it. So land plus improvements. You're buying your land at roughly $15,000. You're improving it. It sounds like for roughly $180,000 all in cost.
No. All in was around 270.
Oh, 270. And how much are you selling it for?
395.
Okay. So then is that all in number? Does that include the cost of the land?
Yes. The only thing that's not including is the realtor commissions and closing costs and any concessions that might be there.
Okay, cool, man. Cool. So really interesting, right? Colorado, you're buying a plot of land for $15,000. You go to a different city, different state, same plot of land, right? Very different price.
Yeah. Well, if you try and do that here in Colorado Springs, you better add a zero to the land cost. So that's what's so interesting about this, John, is this market. So Pueblo West, I'm happy to talk about it. It's not a secret anymore. A lot, costs have gone up. When I moved here, I moved here in 2018, and in 2018, 2019, it's just down I-25. This city's already blowing up. Things are getting expensive, and lots were selling for $3 to $10,000 down there. All utilities, nice houses on both. It was just completely irrational, and so it's just been kind of fun hunting for that level of irrationality.
Well, it's irrational now.
Yeah, it still is really relative. Yeah. So it's been interesting. It's an interesting dynamic.
Okay, cool, man. So share a little bit, Dan, about if you were to do this over again, what would you do differently to accelerate your results, right? Because now you have this experience, you have 80 transactions underneath your belt.
Yeah.
You understand how to bank land, you know how to price it, you know how to spot demand for it, and you know how to identify its various uses, right? So what would you do differently, man, to accelerate your growth?
I would have not, I come from I grew up in rural Midwest, rural Ohio. I come from a very conservative background. So it's taken a lot of time to get out of that. This is so cliche, but it's so true, that fear-based mindset. I always hear my dad was a huge worrier, right? And so initially I was so conservative on marketing dollars. It's ridiculous. I could have, especially like a year and a half ago, man, if I had spent a little bit more, I could be a lot further along. So that would be the big one, especially if you're pursuing a model you see other people doing successfully. Don't be afraid to spend money on marketing, because that's the key to the business. Whether you're looking for an apartment to buy, a piece of land, a mobile home park, right? The marketing is everything. Number two, I would have hired quicker. Absolutely should not have done as much as I did myself. Again, that just came out of fear, really. One of the best decisions I ever made was hiring. Number three, when it pertains to the builds or any of the rehab, the vast majority of my headaches, both with rentals and then the active business, triple check your contractors. Make sure they're currently working in your market. Make sure people you trust, refer them if possible. Don't give them too much money up front. I mean, and if someone's successful for you several times, don't assume that means they're going to continue to be successful, and don't get complacent and comfortable about paying them up front. Can you hear me speaking from experience here? Yeah. So, those would be the big three things that I can pull that I definitely failed the most, is not vetting contractors enough, not hiring fast enough, and being too scared and stingy with marketing dollars.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, man, who you hired, right? Who you would hire first and why. So if you go back through this over again, what position would you hire for first? Would you fill first and why?
Yeah, I would have hired that acquisitions manager much sooner. Because especially with land, John, the due diligence, often you pull up the map, you make sure it's within where we think in the subdivision, there's not some crazy hill or something on that specific lot. And that's about it, because they all have the same utility situation, the same zoning. I'm talking 30 to 60 seconds of due diligence once you know how to do this. So my one acquisitions manager has been taking all inbound leads, all transaction coordination. We're talking 5 to 10 lots a month. And I have some realtors that sell. She does a lot of the dispo as well. And so it's so simple because of land. And so I would have hired her much, much sooner. Also just because I really hate taking the phone calls, and I did it way longer than I needed to. So yeah, I think that's the first thing I would have offloaded sooner. Now, one more thought as a caveat to that, because I'm sending these offer letters and because it's less emotional and it's just a bare piece of land, it's more transactional than if you were going after houses, right? Anyone who's got a normal wholesaling business or apartments, they'll talk about building rapport, and that's really important. It's still important, but it is less so important. I did a lot of transactions where there's almost nothing more than, hey, what's the title company? I want to make sure you're not scamming me. Okay, good. I see it's a legitimate title company. Deal, right? So because of that, I was more comfortable offloading it. She didn't need to be a great salesperson. I would say if you're trying to go after apartments or do traditional wholesaling business, I would offload the transaction coordination first, more the mundane low dollar per hour tasks, and be a little more cautious about offloading acquisitions, because of course that is the lifeblood of the business. But with land, it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, a little bit more of a commodity, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to say it. I mean, John, I had people that would sign the land offer letter, email it to me. I'd forward it to the title agent with them CC'd, and that was the only contact we ever had. So that's not going to happen with a house or an apartment. So very transactional, whereas not the case in many other assets.
So where do you go from here, right? What's the strategy moving forward? And maybe as you unpack that strategy, talk about how you now take this cash that you're building through land sales, land acquisition and sales, and deploying that into other investment types.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have not scaled my investing to the level I've been able to scale my active income. So that's a big part of what I'm working on this year. And also I'm not in a situation I want to get out of. I'm very comfortable. So my thought process as far as long-term buy and holds has changed a bit. So right now I'm looking, this is somewhat putting a hold on things business-wise. I'm looking for a house for my girlfriend and I. I will have a separate unit in the basement that can rent out. There's tons of units with houses with mother-in-law suites here. So working on buying that, but I'm also thinking about, because in Colorado Springs, the price per square foot starts to diminish quite a bit. The middle of the road houses, everyone's going after, but some of the nicer houses, they're much bigger. And if you look at that house anywhere else in the state, go to Boulder or the Denver or the suburbs of Denver, it's well over $1 million. Whereas I can go, I put an offer in yesterday on a 5.4 built 97 with 3,500 square foot. Like that is going to be worth a lot more down the road. So I'm thinking long-term on this buy too, even though it is for personal use. But after that, where I know I need to go, especially with what I just paid in taxes, I need to go find someone who's in the commercial world, which I already have. Specifically, I'm interested in industrial retail, that sort of space, and go after that. I don't want to buy a bunch more single-family rentals. As we were talking beforehand, I have 5 properties and 11 tenants between them, because a couple houses rented by the room, a duplex, and a couple traditional rental single-family houses. And those have been great, and they're a great foundation. But in the long run, I want to move to larger commercial assets, specifically the space I was just talking about, and then do cost segregation. So, yeah.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. Well, Dan, you're living it, you're doing it, you're living it, and you're speaking it. So really, appreciate being on the show, man. You've been able to share some really great insights. We're getting ready to wind the show down right now, but I just want to touch on some highlights. Okay. I think you brought up some great key points, and man, congratulations for being able to, think up an idea, right? Find someone to help you refine the idea and then execute.
Yeah, sure.
I always say that I tell my kids this, I go, you have a lot of really smart people in the world, but it's one thing to come up with an idea. It's another to be able to convert it into an actionable plan.
Yeah.
And then make that a reality, right? So, man, you're doing it and living it. And so congratulations for that, man.
Thank you.
Really happy to see the success. So Dan, what is the one question that you have of me that you think can add some value to our audience?
I guess okay. Off the top of my head, if you weren't in apartments, what space in real estate would you go to?
Industrial product, man. Doing it right now. Making it.
Oh, okay. I might have to ask you about that. Okay.
Yeah. And then also some land as well.
Okay.
So I've been buying up some land in areas that I think I can't go into this in detail, but
sure.
I've been buying up some land in areas where I think it's going to really make a lot of sense, to use the land for very specific uses. And so looking into that right now, and the reason for that is low maintenance, net lease, low cost. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think the future use for that will also offer up some more opportunities beyond when I want to deal with that stuff, right? Like the people you're calling, they're like, hey, you ready to sell? They're like, yeah, I am.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
While they're generating income. And so I think there are some very unique opportunities for land in markets where you have a lot of high density. And of course, it's kind of a contradiction, right? Because in markets where you have a lot of high density, it's built out, you don't have a lot of land. And so the question is, okay, well, how do you find it?
Yep.
And what are uses that you can activate with that land that maybe other people aren't considering? Now, in high density markets where you have a lot of people, obviously I'm not the only one who's thought of this stuff yet. You have other people pursuing those opportunities. But I do believe, man, that there are some unique opportunities right now with land in markets where it's a little bit tight, high demand markets. And then the other side of that too is industrial product, right? I think there's some great opportunities there still. Yeah. And I think going forward, that will remain, to be the case. But I believe that, with industrial product, buying in areas where you have good distribution corridors will make a difference going forward. I know that's happening now, but I think going forward, as we continue to evolve online, and as we continue to figure out how that space rolls out, I think that's going to be a big deal, man.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool, very cool.
So, hey, buddy, I really appreciate you being on. Thanks for, being on. Great show, man. Appreciate having you. I want to wish you continued success, and let's stay in touch, buddy.
Thanks, John. Absolutely. Appreciate you having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.